I'm really excited for this next interview. It's with a very good friend of mine, Sarah Davis. We're going to do 60 minutes of health with Sarah Davis. She's a wonderful nutritionist. She works with families across Westchester County. She's looking to extend her practice. So if there's any questions that arise after this interview, she'll give you her email address and her website at the end of the interview. I want to just give you the heads up that we're going to be talking a lot about family health. And although you may not think that advice for teenagers is applicable in your life, especially if you don't have teenagers or you're not a teenager, you're wrong. This is something that I wish I had put into practice in my life when I was a teenager, but it's not too late. It's not too late for us. And what is applicable to teenagers is also applicable to busy adults. If you think about it, teenagers are in school all day. They have a tremendous amount of pressure to perform, both academically and potentially in sports. And it's the same when you're an adult and you're living in the real world and you have to go to work every day. You have to report into a boss. You have to make sure that you're performing at a high level. And then by the time you get home at night, you have to take care of yourself and potentially take care of other people. And so the foundation, the fundamentals of what Sarah and I are going to talk about in the next session are really important for everybody. And even when she's talking about teenagers, I want you to think of how that's applicable to you in your own life. So without further ado, I bring you my interview with Miss Sarah Davis. Hi, I'm here with the lovely, talented, amazing Sarah Davis, and we're going to tell you a little bit about what Sarah does today. She's an incredible nutritionist, and she works with people locally here in Westchester, and I'll let you talk about a little bit of what you do in your wellness coaching.
Yes. I work primarily with families. I feel like what happened is I would start working with one member of the family, usually the mother, and then inevitably, as we would start spending sessions together, she would start talking about other members of her family and issues with her children's eating habits or concerns about her husband's health, or one of the children being an athlete and unsure of what to eat when they were during their season for sports, what to do before games, after games. So we would wind up sort of doing there's no one size fits all, but we would wind up kind of customizing for the individuals in her family the eating and nutrition tips that I had for them. But honestly, what the biggest thing I found is that the minute one person in the family makes the conscious decision to make a positive change with their eating habits, how much there's a spillover effect onto the rest of the family. And suddenly it was a wonderful thing when soda was no longer in the house anymore, or eliminating certain processed and packaged foods, how everybody was able to reap the benefits of getting back to a cleaner, more wholesome diet.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've seen that in my own practice too, almost the reverse. I work predominantly with children, and then the parents would say, well, those chicken nuggets were delicious, but they were gluten-free and they had sneaky mama sauce baked in, and I want to eat them, but can you make me maybe a little bit of, something a little bit more gourmet that's in my diet? And that's how this all started for me. What have you found has been the hardest part of working with a family that maybe has different needs? If there's allergies, or if there's obesity or diabetes or something that you need to work around, how do you find the easiest way to work with a family is to identify each individual?
Right. Good question. And I have to say, honestly, I think the burden of the responsibility does seem to come down to the mother in these situations. And it is a lot for one person to be trying to take care of several different issues within a household involving people's food preferences, food allergies, as you mentioned, food likes and dislikes and just their own personal eating style. So I do think it's a tall order for one person to have to keep track of. So what I try to do is get the family involved as much as I can, teaching kids how to make a smoothie when they get home from school in the afternoon for a snack, something that they can safely make that doesn't involve turning on the oven or bringing out the knives, is a perfect solution. Kids who like to bake, I'll suggest maybe they can make a nice batch of almond flour blueberry muffins on a Sunday afternoon with one of their parents, and then they're on the counter in the morning when everyone's rushing out the door to breakfast and doesn't have time to make something. It's better than stopping at the deli and grabbing a donut from the store. So I try to enlist everybody in some capacity to become involved. I think another thing I try to impress upon people is that it really doesn't have to be so gourmet every single time you go to turn on the oven. I think people feel a tremendous amount of pressure when they begin to cook, which is why they often resort to takeout food, because they just think that they can't wrap their brain around doing something like preparing dinner for a crowd 4, 5, 6 nights a week. So I also try to give them some tips for simple recipes, easy things that you can make extra servings of, dishes like chilies and soups and things like that, that then later in the week, maybe one person can come home and heat up a portion for themselves. Again, trying to involve the family as much as possible, and also just trying to simplify it for the mom.
Yeah, it's hard to take on the responsibility of not only if you have a child or a husband or a wife that has an issue, but also just taking care of yourself. Right. We so rarely focus the attention of on what we need. Yes. And it's sort of like when you're on an airplane and they tell you, you put the mask over your face first before you help somebody else. Right. It's the same thing in life, but we really rarely ever do that. Mm-hmm. And so I know in your practice, you do a lot of work with teens. Mm-hmm. And when you're, if we all remember being a teenager, it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing for any of us. There's a lot of hormones that are raging. Mm-hmm. There's insecurities. There's a lot of pressure with school, as you very well know right now. Yes. With 3 kids applying to new schools. Mm-hmm. But, what do you think that connection is between anxiety and diet?
Right. That's a great question. And I try to impact my children as much as I can on that subject, because I am a firm believer in the connection between food and mood. And as much as a teenager might try to impress upon you that I wake up with no appetite in the morning, I don't like to eat breakfast, I have no time for breakfast, I'm too busy to stop and get something, I remind them that even if you're not hungry at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, an hour or 2 later, which will be precisely when you're walking into a chemistry exam, you will be inevitably starving, and you will have not had food for 14 hours since your last meal. So I really try to impress upon teenagers, and in my own household, anyone who is an athlete, anyone who is concerned about their academic performance, all of those things are impacted so much by what you are eating or not eating. A big one even is just drinking more water. I find a lot of teenagers tell me they have headaches, they often get muscle cramps when they exercise. They have digestive issues, and I always ask them, what are you drinking? Often I'll find out that they're having an iced coffee in the morning, maybe a diet soda in the afternoon, and really little else until they go to bed at night. So sometimes just little things like adding more water to your diet, bringing an apple with you in the car, or a banana, or wholesome snacks like that to stabilize your blood sugar and give you an energy boost will make a tremendous difference in not only your mood, but how well you can perform as a student, as an athlete, and really just getting through the day.
I wish I had met you when I was a teenager. I mean, is all hope lost for us adults, or can we implement the same strategies
lives as well.
Yes, definitely. And again, I try so much to tell people that so many of the things that I have implemented in my own household and in my own family members, it's very basic stuff. I think, well, for example, parents often say to me, I worry about my family getting enough protein, or some nights it just seems like it's too hard to start thawing a chicken at 6:30 at night when everybody wants dinner on the table in 10 minutes. And I remind them that there are tremendous other ways that you can be getting vegetarian sources of protein. Everybody has a can of beans in the cabinet. Most people have nuts, hummus, or even if you just have a carton of eggs in the fridge, you can make scrambled eggs for dinner, omelets, something simple like that, rice and beans. So I just try to tell people, as adults and as children, as teenagers, nutrition should not be intimidating and very complicated. Most people have more things in their house than they realize that they can throw together for a wholesome dinner. And what I try to encourage people to do is just get back into the kitchen, because we live in a nation of people who resort to takeout and fast food for most of their meals. And I really try to impress upon people to just make a conscious effort for one meal of the day to have it come out of your home.
I love the idea of pre-making food. You know, the almond blueberry brownies, muffins.
That could be a good
I
one.
have chocolate on my brain today. But what else can you pre-make? You know, sometimes I'll make smoothies and they'll stay fine in my fridge for maybe a day or two. But then they start to look funky and brown. You know, what else can you pre-make at the beginning of the week that can, you know, for maybe a busy working family,
Yes,
you know, where you have two adults who are working, what can you make, you know, on a Sunday for the week that is healthy and wholesome and not necessarily complicated, but something that will last for the whole week?
yes, good question. And again, some meals like I have a turkey chili recipe that's made with white beans and corn and crushed tomatoes that can be served the first night over a batch of rice, served hot on Sunday night for dinner, and then put in individual containers in the freezer so that as people come home, they can individually reheat one portion or bring a portion to school and heat it up for their lunches. So some dishes like that, you can just make it to feed an army and then eventually chip away at it over a course of even weeks or months. But other dishes that don't even need to go into the freezer, I'll often say, if you're making an example, if we were to cook Mexican food one night for dinner, make extra chicken and make a double serving of the brown rice and beans, and then you can send in for lunch the next day a piece of cooked chicken with some sliced avocados and a side of rice and beans. Or another thing that we'll do is make a big batch of a grain, and it could be rice or it could be quinoa, it could be farro, and once it's in the refrigerator, it can be served on top of a salad, it can be a side dish, and it can even be a standalone dish on its own, depending on what you put into it. I have a quinoa recipe that also has edamame in it and diced vegetables, and that my kids love to just take to school with them in a container for lunch with some snacks. So sometimes the grains are a great idea. And then again, even simple, very simple things like hard-boiled eggs in a bowl in the refrigerator during the course of the week, where someone can grab a couple hard-boiled eggs with a handful of almonds and an apple and some crackers and put together almost like we jokingly call it a bento box for lunch, just to get you, really, it doesn't have to always be a sandwich from the deli that you've ordered in with some friends on your lunch break to be delivered. It's much better to just look around in your own refrigerator and see what you have that you can bring with you.
And, you know, a lot of these salad places and sandwich places have gotten so expensive too.
Yes.
You know, you end up spending $9, $10 on a chopped salad.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what do you have to show for it? By 3 o'clock, you're hungry again.
Yes.
So
right.
you're almost better preparing. I love the having hard-boiled eggs in the fridge.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing, my husband loves to take hard-boiled eggs with him when he goes. but he doesn't like to be the stinky guy on the train. You know, the guy who's like peeling the hard-boiled egg. Everybody's like, "What are you doing, dude? Don't open an egg shell."
Right.
So he'll
Whitefish
try
salad or something. No,
Yeah.
not on a train.
So we do a lot of protein smoothies in the morning with a whole grain muffin. Yes, before we go. And if we're really running late, you know, we try to do like a gluten-free, organic, or a whole grain waffle.
Yes.
Kids love waffles, and I actually do too.
Sure.
And you know, it's the type of thing that you can actually throw some like nut butter on it and a little bit of local honey, some cinnamon, and you know, now you have like a nutritious breakfast that you can just kind of take out the door.
Perfect.
Until you drop it on your lap when you're driving your kids to school, and you're like, "No, I have peanut butter all over my lap." Isn't that fun?
We started making overnight oats, which is another fun thing that you can, quite honestly, you don't even cook it. You just put the raw oats in a jar with the almond milk, rice milk, water, whatever you want to accompany it with. Leave it in a refrigerator overnight. You don't even have to heat it in the morning if you don't want to, because it's already been soaked overnight so that you can eat the oats. So again, with just even 3 to 5 minutes of planning the night before, you can find something that day when you're in a pinch. And another thing too, I will say, is with the smoothies, what I love about that is I think that there are many times during the day where people ask me, what about a snack? People are always concerned whether or not they should be giving their kids snacks. Should we not be eating snacks? Sometimes I get hungry. And it is a tricky subject. The only negative thing I will say about snacking is that we live in a country of snackers. And you will probably notice when you travel that you will go to countries where there aren't even stores open for hours of the day. And there's no such thing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon of going to the deli and getting a Snickers bar and a coffee. So there is something to be said for giving your body a break from eating. And the reason for that is that once your body burns through sugar, then your body can do what it is supposed to be doing efficiently, which is burning, eliminating toxins that are in your system, burning through fat stores. But when we are eating every 2 hours, your body is just continually fueling itself on sugar, which is actually quite exhausting to your system as well. Your body should be having breaks between each meal. For example, if you're fighting off a cold, or you had a cavity filled at the dentist, or if you have a broken bone, this is the time when your body needs to be healing itself. So it needs breaks throughout the day and at night when it can be doing things other than digesting your foods. That being said, I do feel for children and for adults, there are long stretches of the day. Often lunch could be served at school at 12 o'clock or 11:30 in the morning, and you might not be able to reasonably get dinner on the table until close to 7. Throw in a sport after school or an activity, and that is a very long stretch of time for people to go without food. So once again, getting back to the smoothie idea, I found that that is a wonderful thing that kids can make after school, or adults can make for themselves, because you can make a version of a smoothie that is more substantial, where you can throw in addition to the protein powder and some vegetables and water and ice, maybe you could add a nut butter, you could put in milk of some kind, non-dairy or dairy, whatever you're doing, and make it a little bit more or less substantial. But I think that's an easy kind of a snack that you can also have, because I do think it is important for people to keep, as I said, especially teenagers and children, their blood sugar stable throughout the day.
Yeah, and for adults too, I noticed this mostly when I was pregnant. You know, your body is all wonky, and you're trying to like hold on to all of the nutrition for the baby.
Yes.
But then you're given not very much, and so I found myself craving stuff that I'd never craved before, and not necessarily all bad stuff, but a lot of fats. I felt like I needed a lot of fat and sugar. I could have eaten, you know, tubs upon tubs of ice cream while I was pregnant, and I may have a couple days in my 3rd trimester. But I was like, you know what, I'm huge anyway. It doesn't matter.
It's a hot summer.
Yeah, it's a hot summer. I need to cool down. But one thing that I've worked on with my own clients is, you know, a lot of them, their biggest meal of the day is dinner. and they eat an hour or 2 hours before they go to sleep. They're
Yes.
rushing to get home from work. My husband doesn't get home until 7:30, 8 o'clock every night. And so we're putting the girls to bed. And then by the time we're sitting down to have dinner, it's 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Yes.
And so I typically say, stay up for 4 hours and maybe try to do something a little bit active to get your digestion, your metabolism going, but also maybe eat lighter at night and keep up a good base throughout the day, but eat like your animal proteins, your grains, even if it's whole grains, try to eat that during the day.
Yes.
And then eat a lot of vegetables and maybe fish, or a small amount of chicken or something that isn't that hard to digest.
Right.
I mean, eating meat at night sometimes can help you sleep a little bit better because your body is working so hard, but then it can also have the opposite effect where it's working so hard that it keeps you up.
Exactly. Or often people will wake up the morning after eating a heavy late meal exhausted. And
Right.
It's interesting when they point that out to me, and I said, well, your body was probably breaking down a lot of the sugars from the alcohol you might have had last night, or from the chocolate cake that you had with the glass of wine last night, after the steak dinner with the mashed potatoes and creamed spinach. So your body was sort of working overtime even while you were sleeping. But that is a good point about the dinner. That is a very common scenario in the United States. I notice it a lot. People do eat their largest meal at the end of the day because often breakfast might be non-existent. It could just even be a coffee. And then lunch can often be something at their desk, even eating just a granola bar or...
and it's piddly.
It's
because we're so busy.
Yes.
We don't have time to...
And you don't make the time during the day. And then, of course, understandably, people are ravenous in the evening, and they tend to eat their biggest meal of the day late at night, and then they tend to overeat and then feel afterwards unwell from what they had eaten. So I agree with you 100%. And you notice it again in other cultures. Many people will have soup for dinner at the end of the day, or they might have a salad at the end of the day, or as you pointed out, vegetables and a lean protein. And then during the day, lunch is a more substantial meal. It's only in this country, I think, where people just go at the speed of light all day long, fueling themselves on sugar and caffeine, and then finally collapse at 7 or 8 o'clock at night in front of the TV set with a chicken Parmesan hero or something.
Right. Right. Which sounds pretty good sometimes. But you talk a lot about sugar. And I know that, sugar addiction is a major problem. Some people have told me that kicking sugar is actually even harder than kicking booze or, hardcore drugs and medication. But we don't realize how much sugar there is in everyday foods. I mean, even just alcohol. The difference between having a vodka cocktail with no added sugar to it and having 2 glasses of wine is tremendous.
Yes.
In terms of losing weight. And now I'm not advocating for everybody to go and start drinking, like doing shots of vodka. But, there's a moderation of sugar in your diet. And, I see over the summer having a glass of rosé, every afternoon at 5 o'clock. At 4:49, my body's, my mouth is starting to get excited, and I'm starting to really have that craving for that glass of wine. And it's hard to say, you know what, tonight, it's only Monday. I'm not going to have that glass of wine tonight. Or, I've had a rough weekend. I'm looking forward to relaxing. Maybe the glass of wine will help me. But what is it about sugar, and where can we find sugar, and how do we avoid it?
Yes. Such a good question also. And as I always remind people, sugar cravings beget more sugar cravings. So much to your point about the glass of rosé, it's unbelievable, but even in one day, people can develop a sugar addiction. What does that mean? That means that if at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody in your office says, come down to the conference center, it's somebody's birthday and we got her a cake, and you have that piece of cake at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, Wednesday at 2:45, your body will be wondering, when am I going to get my piece of cake?
Really?
It
Just
happens
one day.
that quickly.
Wow.
The other staggering report that I tell people that they can never get over this, that they did a study in a lab where they took lab rats and had them develop an addiction to cocaine. Having gotten them addicted to the cocaine, they then put a bowl of water in the rat's cage with sugar in it. And every single one of the rats turned away from the cocaine to drink the sugar water.
Really?
So the addiction to sugar is stronger than narcotics.
Wow.
That's much to your point. That is how quickly and what the pull is that sugar has on people. So I try to remind people, as I said, sugar cravings beget more sugar cravings. So I don't have a problem with someone having a glass of rosé at 5 o'clock if that's their sort of turning point in the day, particularly having had a long, busy day at work or a long day taking care of young children. There is something satisfying about being able to shift gears. And if that's your treat of choice, I have no problem with it. What concerns me is some people, having just had one glass of wine, will find themselves then 2 hours later craving another sweet, or catch themselves in the kitchen cabinets after everyone's gone to bed looking for a cookie or something, because that sugar has kind of gotten you onto what I call the sugar roller coaster. And many people can go on it first thing in the morning and they continue up and down with peaks and valleys throughout the day. Some people have an incredible sensitivity to sugar, and even just having a bowl of berries can set them off to start craving sugar throughout the day. Just something as simple as a fruit salad in the morning. Other people can comfortably have healthy whole grains like oatmeal and quinoa and whole wheat breads, which is a wonderful thing because, as I said, your body craves sugar, and it does in fact need sugar, just as your body needs sodium to some degree. So trying to do a full-blown elimination of sugar often will misfire for people, and they just end up being unable to conquer their cravings and then wind up either later that day or once they go off of their detox, craving sugar more than ever.
And I've noticed a lot of people who do, they have the extremes, right?
Yes.
You're on one side or the other, and
Yes.
life is not so black and white. And
Yes.
when you shock your system, a lot of people do juice cleanses, and there's a lot of sugar in those juices.
Yes.
And so it's almost like, okay, well, you're eliminating all of the other good stuff that your body needs, the proteins and the fiber, and you're just pummeling your body with all of the sugar. And then people are, they're jump-starting their system, but they're putting themselves into a place of addiction.
Right.
And then they wonder why, when they go back to eating healthy. I just was talking to a friend the other day. She lost 10 pounds doing a cleanse. And then as soon as it was over, she continued to eat healthy, but her body was in this mode where she gained back 13. So she ended up 3 pounds heavier than where she started before doing, and that's a fairly expensive thing. I think those Blueprint juices are $9 a piece. So, what would you recommend as more of an easy transition away from sugar?
Exactly. And I think a lot of families have this concern in their own houses as well, because they worry about their children eating too many things like candies and donuts and sweets and cookies and ice cream, those types of treats. But what they don't realize is that there's also sugar in crazy places. Like there's sugar in your bread, and there's sugar in your salad dressing, and there's sugar in your ketchup. And so I always tell people there's a lot of sugar in tomato sauce. So you have to read your labels. You really have to educate yourself before you buy something. And I don't imagine anybody has the time or the energy to make everything from scratch. There is a time and a place for packaged foods in your house, but to be very cautious and read labels and find out how much sugar per serving is in a package. Keyword being per serving. That's another thing that often people don't realize when they buy a drink, that an Arizona iced tea might say it has 15 grams of sugar in it, and think, oh, that's not so bad if my son or daughter has an iced tea after soccer, not noticing that it's 2.5 servings in the jar.
Right.
So then when you drink the entire jar, that is
37 grams of sugar,
and imagining that an iced tea is any healthier than a Mountain Dew, you bought the iced tea because you thought it was the better choice. So reading the labels is an important one. But another thing I try to tell people is, if you can get your sugar from in healthy ways as well, and allow yourself an indulgence too. for example, a lot of people can find sugar in sweet vegetables, making things that are soups that have butternut squash in them, roasted vegetables, roasted sweet potatoes, carrots and red peppers with dip. There are some fruits and vegetables that are just naturally sweet that can help satisfy a craving for something sweet. And again, healthy grains also can satisfy a craving for people. And unlike doing those juices and the juicings that we were talking about, where you often lose a lot of the fiber and the protein and just simply wind up with a very concentrated form of sugar, when you're eating the whole fruit or a bowl of oatmeal in the morning, maybe with some blueberries in it and a little bit of honey and some pumpkin seeds on top. It's something where the combination of adding the fats from the nuts and the fiber from the blueberries will slow down the burn of the oatmeal also. So a lot of times I tell people, if you're having something with sugar in it, try to pair it with fats and proteins. Putting a little bit of peanut butter on an apple, for example, something as simple as that can often help people not get such a rush from the sugar. And then again, as I said, I think it's also about making sure that you are evenly spacing your meals throughout the day. And don't catch yourself going for long stretches of time where you're not eating, because unfortunately your body rarely, when you're ravenous, starts to crave celery sticks. What it starts to crave is going to be the quick, simple carbs for a burst of energy. There have been studies also that have shown that when you start to get tired, the hormone signals in your brain get all mixed up. So the signals that are telling you when you are hungry, when you are full, they get mixed up when you're tired. And as a result of that, people often can no longer determine when they're full. They can't decide if they're truly hungry, and they don't really know what they should be having. But the first thing your body gravitates towards is sugar. So that's why
That's where the midnight snack comes from.
Yes.
Up till midnight, I may as well have a Snickers bar. Yeah, or grilled cheese or something right before I go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that I, with the whole sugar conversation, a fad a couple of years ago began, the gluten-free fad.
Yes.
And yes, gluten is not good for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with a lot of gluten-free food is that to compensate for the lack of, whether it's protein, they'll put a bunch of like crap into gluten-free prepackaged food and
Yes.
sugar. So
Yes.
sugar, salt to make it taste better.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think you're doing yourself a favor. But I've seen people have come to me and said, I went gluten-free and nothing changed. I'm actually, now I can't sleep anymore, and I have high anxiety, and I'm gaining weight, and I don't know what's going on. Isn't gluten-free supposed to be a good thing? So I have a little exercise for us to do, which combines what you were talking about with sugar addiction and reading labels and educating yourself. And I have 3 different types of gluten-free brownie mix.
Okay.
Because I have a really simple recipe that actually uses zucchinis, and I juice a zucchini and I put the zucchini juice in instead of using water. So a lot of these say use melted oil or butter.
Okay.
And you can actually replace the oil and butter with either coconut oil, which is really great for you, or avocado oil, which has nice fatty acids, or you can actually use the meat, the pulp from juicing the zucchini, and it'll actually help the brownies stay really moist. But these are 3 gluten-free brownie mixes that I got at Target.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all, accessible. This is the joke in the food business is you can get your product in front of your customer at Whole Foods, but you can get your product in front of everybody at Target.
Right. Absolutely.
And so these are accessible. This is a Betty Crocker. This is King Arthur. And then this is a new brand that I'd never heard of before among friends. And just by looking at this, my first assumption was that this, because it's, it looks more granola, crunchy, organic, that this would actually be the best for you. And I figured Betty Crocker might be the worst. So I started to look at the ingredients, and I don't know if you want to look at them with me, but typically when you're reading labels, do you look at the first ingredients?
Yes. The ingredients in a packaged food, they are printed in the order of how they are, the quantities of that ingredient. So if sugar is the first ingredient on a box of cereal that is claiming to be puffed rice, its first ingredient is sugar, maybe the second, third, or fourth ingredient is rice. That tells you there's a lot of sugar in that cereal.
So the first ingredient in all three of these is sugar.
Yes.
What's interesting to me is that in the Betty Crocker, it just says sugar. And in the King Arthur and the Friends, what's this called again? Among Friends is cane sugar. So do you see a big difference in cane sugar versus the processed refined sugar?
Right. Not so much. I will say, though, to be mindful that there are many, many names for sugar. So often it will turn up on an ingredient list 2, 3, or 4 times. So you think you've seen sugar and you've had the last of it. And then it can turn up later as dextrose on the recipe or with another name. So often it's not just the simple table sugar or the cane sugar, but there's also another type of sugar already in there. My big thing is about high fructose corn syrup. I will always tell people at the end of the day, when you're going to choose, when you're looking at labels, anything that has high fructose corn syrup in it or partially hydrogenated oils, put it back on the shelf, because your body can process fats. Your body can process sugars. It is the chemically altered artificial sugars and oils that are created in a lab that are toxic, that are impossible for your body to know how to break down and digest. So when in doubt, I say always take good old-fashioned sugar.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that we always look for. And so it's interesting too, because these are gluten-free, and usually in gluten-free baking and cooking, you don't use just one type of flour. You use a mix of flour, because gluten-free flours are typically fairly dense.
Yes.
And, maybe in a brownie, it's nice to have a nice, dense, moist brownie. But if you just used one flour in making a brownie, it might be hard. It might become sort of like a rock.
Right.
So in this one, in the Betty Crocker, they use a mix of alkali, rice flour, potato starch, cornstarch, and xanthan gum, which is a leavening agent, and salt. And that's their mix. And in the King Arthur, they use tapioca, rice flour, and then cocoa with alkali, baking powder instead of the xanthan gum. And then they also use baking soda and cornstarch. They also add vanilla flavor, which is interesting, because a lot of times when I'm baking, I'll throw extra vanilla in, because I know that it's a fairly benign ingredient that can add a lot of flavor without adding sugar. And then in the Friends, the Among Friends mix, there is whole grain oat flour, cocoa powder, and it looks like they have brown rice flour, baking soda, and sea salt. So if I were buying this just based off of the ingredients, I would probably buy this one.
Yes.
Just because the flours that they use are more whole grain. There's a whole grain oat flour. They use sea salt instead of iodized salt.
Yes.
And then they're also using, but these all contain soy, I think, which is interesting, which can also be like a binding agent.
Right.
And then there's unsweetened chocolate in this, versus these two use just regular chocolate. So in looking at the contents, the sugar content for both of these two are 18 grams of sugar per serving. And there are, 16 servings in here and 16 servings in here. But if you look here, there's there's 14 grams of sugar. So 4 grams less, but there's only 14 servings here. So you're actually getting almost the same amount of sugar, but this is a better type of sugar, with the unsweetened chocolate and the cane sugar. Another thing to look at is the sodium content. And I know that a lot of people are concerned lately about sodium levels.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me a little bit about why sodium affects you so badly. I know for kids, it can dehydrate them, and it can cause their brain function to not be as sufficient as it needs to be in school.
Right. Well, again, getting back to packaged and processed foods, that is inevitably the worst form of sodium for children, for adults, really for anyone, which is why I have no problem with somebody seasoning their meat before they put it on the grill. I have no problem with somebody wanting to salt a batch of French fries, but it's the sodium that will be in a can of prepared beefaroni, where the sodium content in one serving, where the can might have 2 or 3, would be more sodium than you would want to have for a day.
Right.
So not only
ramen noodles. Oh my gosh. I looked at the sodium content in a package of ramen noodles this summer when I was doing a college prep course. I could not, it's like 980 grams of micrograms of sodium.
Right.
Which is
right. You will not get your rings on your fingers for 3 days
No.
after eating those ramen noodles, and you will wonder why you can't button your pants because you're so swollen from all of the sodium. So it's not just the artificial salts and the chemically preserved products that are so high in salt that scare me, but what is to me even more disturbing is that when you look at a package of chicken nuggets or a box of macaroni and cheese, which so many children are having for dinner 4 and 5 nights a week, the sodium level is so high, and that is what they think food is supposed to taste like. Mm. So that is my biggest concern, is that I always just remind people, if you can start getting your kids used to what an actual piece of chicken tastes like, or what does it taste like to boil water and put pasta in it, stir it around, drain it, and put sauce on top, because it's just the packaged foods, the health concerns of eating too much salt are there, but also I think it just skews everybody's sense of what real food tastes like, which makes it harder and harder as people get older, trying to convince them to eat more whole foods.
Right, yeah, it messes with your taste buds.
Right.
100%. And there's ways to get around that too, like using more of the pink Himalayan rock salt. Mm-hmm. It's so much saltier,
yes,
than iodized salt. Iodized salt, you have to use so much of it, but just a couple of cranks of a Himalayan pink sea salt, and it's just as salty as tablespoons of iodized salt.
Yeah.
So it's testing out different types of salt. And I was wondering too, while you were talking, do people have salt addictions just like they have sugar addictions? Probably, right?
Yes. I mean, I would imagine so. I think more of what I hear about is people that feel like they just cannot get control over their sweet tooth. But I do definitely know that people tell me often what happens is if they polish off a plate of brownies, they find themselves then an hour or 2 later craving something really salty. So understandably, your body always wants to maintain an equilibrium. So if you eat something very salty, sometimes maybe if you have Chinese food, people will find themselves afterwards saying, let's go out for ice cream afterwards.
Right, yeah.
I think I need something sweet. Or you catch people in the movie theaters with a big bucket of salted popcorn and a box of Starburst or Raisinets or Sour Patch Kids or something, because your body, of course, having had one, generally craves the other to balance itself out. So,
or if you're like me, you just dump the Raisinets in the popcorn,
which is so much more efficient.
Yeah, and delicious.
Right.
So this one so far is winning the test of reading the ingredients, reading the sugar content.
Okay.
It has 115 milligrams of sodium, of salt. Okay. And these two, this one actually has 110, but this one, the Betty Crocker, only has 60, which I thought was really interesting. So, is it okay, because this is sea salt, is it okay that this has almost 3 times the amount of sodium? Well, I guess one and a half times, no, 2.5 times. So if this has, because the servings are different, so this one would have probably about 130 if you had 16 servings in here. So
you're thinking about, if you're thinking about salt versus sugar, which one would you go with?
Right. I have to say, I think the reasons that we chose this one from the get-go, I think are the reasons that I would still stick with it as the best choice. But quite honestly, I think if you made the three of them, because they are relatively similar, and somebody in your family announced that they didn't like this one, or they preferred this one, or they really love that one, I still always say at the end of the day, you're better off making the brownies at home with your family, even if it's coming from a mix, than going to the grocery store and buying Hostess cupcakes, the chocolate cupcakes with the cream filling inside or whatever. All three of these packages, on the back, the ingredient list is maybe at most 10 items. Now, you and I both know if you go home and you bake a cake or cookies or muffins with your kids, usually you're not using more than 6 or 7 ingredients either. So I also encourage people, when they look at labels, always go with the shorter ingredient list and go for foods that you can pronounce. Sometimes you need a magnifying glass to read the back of a granola bar from Cliff, where there might be 30 different ingredients in it, and some of the words are 18 or 19 letters long, and you can't pronounce them, and they have no vowels. So,
you're like, is this Japanese or Korean?
So I have to say,
well, like this one, monocalcium phosphate. I mean, that's not that long, but what is that?
Right.
I don't even know
how
what
many
that
of
is.
those do you want to have on the package? That is not wonderful. But again, as I said, even just looking, we have a session that I do when I teach nutrition to my clients, and I call it being a nutrition detective. And we do compare food labels. And people are fascinated when they see what is in a box of Cheez-Its, and the ingredient list is half the side of the package. They can't pronounce any of the words. There's yellow dye number this. There's so many things, and they start to look at it, and then the kicker is I ask them, now, where do you keep the cheese in your house? Do you keep your cheese in the cabinet? Do you keep it in the oven? Do you keep it in the dishwasher? And they all look at me, they go, the refrigerator. And I say, exactly. So why should something with dairy in it be sitting in a cabinet for 6 months at a time? So even if the brownie mixes are not perfect, you're making something at home, you're going to be consuming it probably within 3 or 4 days. It's not something that you purchase that has a sell-by date in 2018.
Right. Or you can freeze it. And one thing that I love to, in addition to the zucchini, I love to add protein powder. I have this great vegan protein powder that I use. And then I also will replace, some of the oils or the butter with healthier oils and fats, like the avocado oil or coconut oil. And then also adding chia or flaxseed, ground chia, ground flax. And you could even replace, this one has vanilla. But if you're baking from scratch, there's, a lot of added things that, that you can remove that are added to this to make it taste better. But you can get aluminum-free baking powder and baking soda, which doesn't have the toxic chemicals. These don't say that it's aluminum-free, but this contains only less than 2% of baking soda, so it's not that big of a deal. But when you're cooking at home, sometimes you can take other measures to make it a little healthier. But there are ways you can kind of zhuzh up a boxed product.
Yes, indeed.
So, in closing, because we've taken up a lot of your time, and I'm so grateful that you've been able to give us so many. I know, and I could talk to you about it all day. The people who are participating in this course are really most excited about easy transitions into a better, healthier lifestyle. A lot of the plans that are out there right now are just so aggressive, like we were talking about before. It's so black and white. What would you say to somebody who, they're getting into the right mental state, they're hopeful, they're setting their intentions for what they want for their life. As they start this program and they're coming up with meals, what would you tell them if they become frustrated? How do you deal with getting stuck? I feel like a lot of people that I've worked with kind of they start off hot,
Yes.
and they're going for a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months, but then after that time they get stuck. So what would you recommend to them for ongoing wellness and health?
Right, right. And that is a good question too, because we also live in a culture where people want quick results. They want to lose 30 pounds in 30 days. And sadly, my approach is not very sexy when you start telling people that it's really, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you might not see results before you have to put on a dress for your friend's wedding by next weekend. But over the course of time, what is much more rewarding about this is that you will just find it's not only about a number on a scale, but it is truly about the health benefits of having better energy, sleeping better at night, feeling more mental clarity, getting rid of some digestive issues too. Many people come to me complaining of things like reflux and headaches and stomach aches, and all of these things miraculously disappear when you just start eating a more clean, whole foods diet. I also remind people not to get crazy with calorie reduction. I think sometimes people cut out too much food and they put themselves on very restricted, low calorie diets. And unfortunately, not only, as you were saying, does it mix up your metabolism, but also your body really, for all intents and purposes, shuts down because
And it holds on to all of those
on
fats,
to
so
the
it's almost
calories.
counterintuitive.
Absolutely. You put your body on a diet where it's getting under 1,200 calories a day, and your body is going to store every single calorie that you put into it. You start skipping breakfast, you start skipping lunch, you start skipping dinner. Your body doesn't know if it's ever getting lunch or if that was it. That might be it forever. And if that's the case, I really better hang on to what I had yesterday because I don't know if I'm getting anything else. So I just remind people to feed your body. A lot of people tell me I'm eating more since I've started working with you and I'm losing weight.
Right.
It's really, as I said, it's a fascinating thing when you start to eliminate the toxic foods and the chemicals and the processed foods and just get you a simple, clean, whole foods diet. How quickly you can find yourself feeling so much better and having the results that you're looking for.
And it's an upward spiral too. A lot of us are in a downward spiral where we're eating nasty foods that have nasty chemicals in them. It's making us feel gross, which is making us want to eat more of those nasty foods that are really hurting our bodies. And then we're getting even more depressed and anxious and beating ourselves up. And it's a downward spiral. And if you can start to reverse it, there's no limit to how great you can feel.
Yes.
And you're right, it's not an immediate thing. But I think for the first couple of weeks, I'm sure you've seen this with your clients, they do feel a huge difference. It's almost like a big burden's been taken off of their shoulders because they're not in that downward spiral anymore.
Yes.
Now they have the opportunity and the space to move up.
Yes. And understandably, everybody gets bored. I even go through these challenges, as I'm sure even a chef like yourself does, trying to come up with ideas of things to cook for dinner, what to pack for lunches in the morning, what's a quick breakfast that you can get everybody to agree upon before they run out the door and not get a late pass. So it is a big challenge to try to keep it fresh. So I don't think there's anything wrong with experimenting with new recipes, going into stores, and there's so many healthier restaurants that are available now. It used to almost be if you were trying to eat well, you couldn't go out to dinner, because you just knew that there was no way that spinach could taste that good. Because you're making it at home and it doesn't taste that good. There's got to be a lot of salt and a lot of butter going into that vegetable, because nobody's eating it that way at my house. But now, luckily, there are many restaurants that are available where you can get a vegetarian plate. You can find dishes that are gluten-free. You can find things that are vegan. You can find organic restaurants. So you should allow yourself to have a little fun too. That's another thing that I have much sadness when I talk to teenagers in particular, and a lot of women as well, even as adults, that there has somehow become a relationship with food that is antagonistic and frustrating, and the pleasure of eating has gotten lost along the way. So they have seen food as the enemy and something that they approach with fear and anxiety, and automatically your body picks up on that. And I remind them that when you haven't seen your college roommate in 5 years, do you suggest, oh, let's go to the car dealership together? Or do you say, let's go have lunch?
Right.
Right? You and your husband want to have a date night.
To go to the car dealership.
You and your husband are going on a date. You don't meet at the CVS to go buy, your paper products. You say, let's go out to dinner. Let's have a nice meal. Let's order a glass of wine. So food is supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be celebratory. Most celebrations in your life revolve around a meal. It's Thanksgiving dinner, it's the wedding tasting, it's the wedding cake, it's all of these things. So I do try to encourage young people, women, everybody to just enjoy food and try to get away from the fearful relationship. People get very hung up on numbers. They ask me constantly, how many grams of carbohydrates can I have a day? How many ounces should be in a piece of bread? How many calories do I want to be eating for a snack? And I really try to get away from that mindset.
Yeah. No, it's really helpful. And one of the last things I'll say too is that we're lucky we're not animals.
Right.
We're the only species on Earth to date that cooks their food and has any sort of culinary expertise. You don't see like an armadillo, cutting up the little ants that, that it's
marinating.
Marinating them in teriyaki sauce. It's not, it's not a part of our need to eat is real, and we all do need to feed our bodies. But what we eat either comes from a happy place or a sad place. Some people eat because they're anxious and depressed, and some people starve themselves when they're anxious and depressed.
Exactly.
And when you're happy, when you're putting good energy into your food, it's almost, I think it might be the reason why people pray before they eat. You're saying, bless this food to my body, in whatever religion you practice, but you're saying, bless this food to my body, and then guess what? It is blessed as it is going into your body. It's a happy experience. It's a good energy.
It's beautiful.
And a lot of people don't see it that way. They're just eating, to feed a need.
Yes.
Or to quelch an anxiety or a bad emotion.
Yes.
So I want to give you a huge shout out. I don't know, do you have a website where people can check you out?
Yes, I absolutely have a website, and I would love to hear from anybody, any questions, any comments that people have. My company is called Body Balance 365. The point of that being that, as I said, it is a day in and day out commitment, but also a reward, taking care of yourself. It doesn't have to be something where you've got 2 weeks to cram yourself into the dress that you wore to your high school reunion 10 years ago, but it's just about the day in, day out benefits of taking care of yourself and eating well. And it's Sarah at bodybalance365.com. If you want to email me.
SARA or H?
With an H on the end.
With the H, okay.
And Body Balance 365, all one word.
And then you'll work with people all over the country, right? You can work with people via Skype or on the phone.
Exactly. I have a lot of people who call me during their lunch hour, and I can hear the door to their office closing because they don't want anybody to know that they're in the city talking on their computer to their nutritionist. But luckily, it is something that we can do pretty much from anywhere with anybody. There's not too much that changes. I personally love it when I get to work with my clients in the same room, because I just get such a pleasure out of spending time with people and helping them in this area, because I feel it is just something that is so important and such an easy thing for people to overlook. And before you know it, people have gone to several different doctors and they can find themselves on 4 and 5 and 6 prescription medications when you realize that much of it could really be treated with what you're eating.
Oh yeah, big time. I don't know if it will precede this conversation or come after, but in speaking with the gastroenterologist yesterday, the doctor, I learned so much about you really are what you eat.
Mhm.
I mean, to a medical degree. And you know,
Yes.
there's neurons and endorphins that are released from your gut that aren't even released from your brain,
Right.
more so from your gut. And if your insides, if your digestive tract is in turmoil,
Mhm.
then there's no way you could possibly, you know, have a healthy mindset or a
Right.
healthy spirit, and vice versa.
Mhm.
So everything affects everything, and it can be overwhelming for a lot of people. And a lot of people just shut down. They feel stuck. They feel anxiety around, oh, well, this diet plan didn't work. This fat burn pill didn't work. This
Yes.
get skinny quick. And that's because they're not looking at it from a holistic perspective.
Yes.
And I know that you were trained in the Integrative Nutrition
Mhm.
Institute, and that is such a great study and baseline for your practice, because it's all about holistic nutrition
Yes.
and total mind, body, and spirit.
That's right. And it's very common for people to go to a specialist to treat one particular complaint that they might have. And the doctor might not even ask, well, what else are you taking for other things? And how did this start? When did it start? How's your diet? How's your sleep? I had a client who had such horrible reflux that she started a prescription for reflux. And that unfortunately started to do a number on her stomach. So she was taking medication for her stomach. And then in addition to that, was having such a hard time sleeping that another doctor prescribed her with sleeping pills. This was literally the root of the evil was coffee. She was drinking so much coffee that it was giving her terrible reflux. And then the reflux medication was upsetting her stomach. But naturally, all the caffeine was also keeping her awake at night. So incredibly enough, just switching her over to green tea and drinking water, she was able to eliminate 3 different prescription drugs. I mean, I'm not saying it's always going to be that simple, but it's amazing how quickly we can be overwhelmed with health issues and realize that just by making some simple changes to what we're putting in our body, we can help ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time.
Mhm.
It's like compacting one medication just to mask the symptoms.
Yes.
You know, you're masking the symptoms of having heartburn, which cause other problems.
Mhm.
And then you have to mask the pain by taking another medication.
That's right.
And then because you're taking all of this medication, now you can't sleep at night. So you need to put yourself to sleep with medication. Probably by the time you get off all this medication, you feel like a completely different person.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, I know from experience, and this is one of the reasons why I started this education in the first place, is when I was 18, I couldn't sleep. I was waking up every single night with extreme anxiety attacks.
Mm.
And, you know, I didn't necessarily have the hardest life, but I didn't have the easiest life growing up. And, you know, we all have anxiety and stress and insecurities. But I felt like I had a pretty good handle on my life, and that I had a good perspective. And so I was really concerned about what was going on. And I think because I had always been skinny and teased for being so skinny my whole life, and I just ate crap all the time. I mean, there wasn't a week that went by where I wasn't going to McDonald's and getting you know, a double cheeseburger and French fries, and then an apple pie afterwards, and you know, and a smoothie or something afterwards. And I gave myself high cholesterol. The doctors thought I had Crohn's or colitis. I had all sorts of anxiety and anxiety issues. I was drinking a ton of coffee. I was having heart pain. It was just awful. It was awful, awful. And when I started to work with nutritionists and taught myself how to cook, I realized that everything that I was putting into my body was directly affecting not just my health, but my mental well-being as well. And it's such a wonderful transformation to see in other people. Yes. It's really why I'm doing this, because I want the world to be a better, happier, more peaceful place, and I think we could do that through food.
Yes, yes. I've told parents before, when they tell me that their children are hyper, or my kids they can't sit still, they're running around all the time and are getting in trouble at school with the teachers because they won't sit still in the chair. And I'll ask them, well, what did they have for breakfast? And when somebody tells me, well, they had Cocoa Puffs, and then they had a couple of donut holes, and then they arrive at school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're told to sit in a chair and learn how to do long division. And I look at the parents and I say, well, I have an idea. Why don't you smoke a crack pipe and balance your checkbook? And we'll see how that goes.
Right.
Because it is very difficult for a 6 or 7-year-old to pay attention to a teacher who is teaching them something that is relatively difficult when they are so hopped up on sugar and chemicals that their body is literally having an entire reaction. And then everyone's wondering, why can't he sit still for 40 minutes? What's wrong with this kid? Maybe we should medicate him. And I am not belittling the pharmaceutical industry, because there are 1,000,001 wonderful medications that have been invented to save lives. But oddly, people don't think to ask, well, what are you feeding this kid?
Right.
It's very sad.
It's usually the last question, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to see that the medical profession is starting to, the Eastern medicine and Western medicines are starting
Agreed.
to get a little closer, meet in the middle, because maybe one extreme or the other is not
Yes.
for you.
Right.
You think that acupuncture or herbs are a little too aggressive for you, but then you're okay with going and getting a cheeseburger from McDonald's. There's got to be some place in the middle.
Yes.
And I don't necessarily agree with both.
Right.
Like don't go to your Chinese herbalist and then go get a cheeseburger afterwards. Although you probably won't want to.
Right.
But I'm so glad you were able to spend the afternoon with me, and I'm sure we will have dozens of questions, hundreds of questions for you ongoing. And you have raised 3 beautiful children. You are absolutely stunning and gorgeous and funny and well-spoken and really an asset. And we're really grateful to have you be a part of this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if I can say that, I really have to say, Lindsay, they are all in good hands listening to you, because you practice what you preach, you put your money where your mouth is, and as an incredibly busy businesswoman with 3 young children, you have never allowed your children's health, your own health, that of your husband, to slide to the back burner because you just let it go to the wayside. So you are an example of what clean and healthy and just having fun and a positive mindset too, and remembering to take the time to step back and breathe, how important that is.
Yeah, breathing, drinking more water, getting more sleep, and eating clean.
Sounds good.
Amen. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes,
Thank you so much.